It's been over 24 hours since the Devils traded for Jacob Markstrom, and now that I've had time to digest it, let's talk about Tom Fitzgerald and his tenure so far as Devils general manager. Has he ever been on the hot seat, and what are my thoughts on him moving forward? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play announcer, Devils are for books and pitchforks, and also part-time credentialed media member, Trey Matthews. In the previous episode, I talked about the big trade that took place for the Devils, in which they acquired Jacob Markstrom from the Calgary Flames in exchange for Kevin Ball, a first-round selection in next year's draft that is top 10 protected. Not only that, the Flames retained 31.25% of Markstrom's contract. It seems like the trade is well received amongst the Devils discourse. Obviously, you'll get a few people that express their displeasure, given the fact that Markstrom is a little up there in age. Is he a long-term solution? Probably not. But if we look at the other potential goalies that were available, John Gibson's contract kind of scares me. Linus Ullmark, you might have to sacrifice that 10th overall pick in this year's draft. Saros is a pending UFA after this season. Same with Ullmark. So if you get one of those goalies, you're going to have to break the bank. And keep in mind, people like Luke Hughes, Shimo Nemetz, they're still on their entry-level contracts. And Dawson Mercer needs a new contract this offseason. I think this was a smart investment by Fitzgerald, and he didn't have to sacrifice all that much. Kevin Ball, he can easily be replaced. He's solid, not spectacular, but in terms of how the trade worked out, I'm actually satisfied with it. And who knows, if the Devils have another poor performance next season, then maybe they'll get another top 10 pick, and that draft selection goes right back to New Jersey. In today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about Tom Fitzgerald and his history as general manager for the Devils. I've been seeing this discussion take place all throughout the Devils discourse, and I've had this conversation before. In fact, I think I did an episode centered around the matter shortly before the season concluded, but I know I've talked about it in prior off seasons, saying that Tom Fitzgerald deserved General Manager of the Year consideration last offseason. Since he got Timo Meier, the Devils went back to the playoffs. They got the most wins in franchise history, and this is a organization that has won 3 Stanley Cups. They made it to the second round of the playoffs. We saw the surgence of Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, and a few others. Lindy Ruff was one of the finalists for the Jack Adams Trophy. I felt as though that Tom Fitzgerald deserved more consideration for General Manager of the Year. He wasn't a finalist, but I wanted to bring that into the light. But what an offseason and what a regular season performance can do for someone like Tom Fitzgerald, because he went from people saying he's the best general manager in the NHL to a lot of people turning on him and saying that he deserves to be on the hot seat. He deserves to be fired. And I want to revisit that talking point now that Jacob Markstrom is added to the roster. Let's look back at some of Tom Fitzgerald's big moves as Devils general manager, give some insight as to how this signing really helped New Jersey in the long run, because I think Fitzgerald gets an unfair amount of blame as to how the Devils struggled this past season. Yes, he should have gotten a goalie. He should have traded away Vitek Vanecek when he had the chance to maybe get someone who is 10 times better than him. I know Connor Hellebuck's name was thrown into the fire before he signed that lengthy extension to remain in Winnipeg, which I guess took a lot of people by surprise. But let's focus on what the Devils have currently and how it's impacted them to this present moment. And then in segment 2, I will give my thoughts as to whether or not Tom Fitzgerald deserves to be in the hot seat. And then to round it all off in segment 3, let's preview the Stanley Cup Final Game 6 taking place in Edmonton later tonight when this episode goes live. For this list, we're going to focus on not all the signings or trades that Tom Fitzgerald has made, because trust me, there's plenty, and you can look at Cap Friendly to see for yourself. Check it out before that site goes dark in a few weeks. I decided to narrow it down to big impact players, and we'll talk about some players that are no longer on the roster, particularly Damon Severson and Ryan Graves. I continue to see comments saying, why didn't the Devils re-sign Severson or Graves and keep them a part of the roster? I will give that explanation for the fifth and final time, hopefully. But let's focus on one of Tom Fitzgerald's bigger moves. Obviously, he re-signed Jack Hughes to an 8-year, $64 million extension. This was before Jack Hughes really took off and became a phenomenon around the NHL. If Jack Hughes can become a finalist for the Hart Trophy or maybe someday win it, albeit he has to stay healthy, that might go down as one of the best contracts in the NHL, and I'm being dead serious. I don't think that's a hot take. He re-signed Jesper Bratt to an 8-year, $63 million extension. Ironically, Jesper Bratt wears the number 63 on his sweater. Bratt was an all-star this past season. He was a point-per-game player. He was one of the more consistent players on the Devils roster, and he really took his game another level, and I'd say he improved on defense as well. We saw him take more shifts on the PK. Those are obviously some of the more moves that we anticipated for the Devils to make, and Nico Hischier doesn't count because that was Ray Shero's signing, not Tom Fitzgerald, but Hischier also has a really good contract for what he could turn out to be in a year or so. But 2021 offseason, the biggest move that Tom Fitzgerald made was signing free agent Dougie Hamilton to a 7-year, $63 million contract. It seems like people have mixed emotions when it comes to Dougie Hamilton. On the one hand, fantastic when it comes to offense, but defense, that's where he sort of struggles. And people say he's a little too soft. He might not be what he's worth. I'll just say this. If there's no Dougie Hamilton signing, then New Jersey doesn't become a topic of discussion for potential trade candidates and free agent candidates. Remember, Jacob Markstrom waived his no movement clause to be dealt to New Jersey. Same with Jake Allen, because they saw what New Jersey was forming. You had some other players take pay cuts in order to remain in New Jersey. And that offseason, he also signed Tomas Tatar. I believe Jonathan Bernier was also a part of that class for the Devils that joined the team. Bernier didn't really play any factor whatsoever. We don't talk about him. I think this is the first time I've talked about Bernier on this show in a few years. Andre Palat, 2022, 5-year, $30 million deal. I recently talked about this. Palat is anywhere from solid to mediocre, and he steps up his game come playoff time. He is heavily overpaid, however. I like Palat and his leadership and his experience, and he played a decent role in the playoffs as to why the Tampa Bay Lightning went to 3 straight Stanley Cup Finals and actually won it back-to-back. Palat, solid, not spectacular, but we know the circumstance. He signed shortly after Johnny Gaudreau announced that he was going to sign with Columbus, and that should give you a good indication as to what was going down in New Jersey. They were trying to hold out for Johnny Gaudreau, and he didn't come their way. But take it for how you want to take it. Erik Haula, very underrated move if you ask me. Summer 2022, the Devils gave up Pavel Zacha, a guy who has never lived up to the hype. Unfortunately for Zacha, he was selected 6th overall by the Devils, and here are some players that were selected in his draft class. Connor McDavid, one of the greatest hockey players to grace the sheet of ice, and I think it's safe for me to say that, even though McDavid is still in his 20s. Jack Eichel won the Stanley Cup with Vegas last season. Mitch Marner, Noah Hanifin, Zach Werenski, Timo Meier, Mikko Rantanen. I could go on. Matt Barzal, Kyle Connor, Thomas Chabot. I think you all get the point. Pavel Zacha, unfortunately, never lived up to what he was supposed to be. And considering who was surrounding him in that draft class, yeah, that's definitely a tough pill to swallow. But Timo Meier, like I just said, was in that draft class for what it's worth. But the Devils get Erik Haula, a player that is solid. He's a good role player, and he's only played on playoff caliber rosters. Erik Haula has only missed the playoffs twice in his lengthy career. this past season with the Devils and 2019 with the Vegas Golden Knights. That Golden Knights team still went to the playoffs, but Erik Haula missed the playoffs due to injury. And Erik Haula re-signed in 2023, 3 years, $9.45 million. It might surprise a lot of people. He has a no-trade clause, and I think next year that's going to change to a modified no-trade clause in which there's 6 teams that he can't be dealt to. Erik Haula, very good contributor, and I would say he was one of the reasons why Jack Hughes really took off, because he could do the face-offs, he can play on special teams, he can work the corners, and he can sort of take the pressure off of Jack Hughes' shoulders, especially in the face-off department. Timo Meier, a blockbuster deal in 2023 in which the Devils gave up Andreas Johnson, Nikita Oholtuk, Fabian Zetterlund, Shakir Mukhamadullin, their first-round draft pick for Timo Meier. And then later that summer, he re-signed to an 8-year, $70.4 million deal. Timo time. And a lot of people think that he's overpaid when he initially re-signed. And I said, nope. The Devils were right to give him that contract. I said there was another team that sure as hell would have offered Timo a bigger contract. And I think NHL Network was saying that he could have gotten paid annually anywhere from $9 to $10 million. And Timo took sort of a pay cut. 40 goal scorers, especially who have a body frame like him, power forwards, they don't just grow on trees. I think that was a good trade by Fitzgerald initially and a good re-signing. Now you got the core 4, Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, Nico Hischier, all of them locked up long-term. And then before we switch over to the next segment, Damon Severson, Ryan Graves. I'm going to keep this brief. The reason why the Devils did not re-sign both of those players is not because they didn't want to, and I'll throw in Miles Wood into the mix because he signed a 6-year deal with the Colorado Avalanche. Here was Damon Severson's contract once that sign and trade took place with the Columbus Blue Jackets. 8 years, $50 million. Ryan Graves, unrestricted free agency, signed with the Pittsburgh Penguins. 6 years, $27 million. Yeah, the Devils couldn't afford that, especially since they had to re-sign Jesper Bratt and also Timo Meier. If Damon Severson and Ryan Graves were on the roster with that sort of money, you'd be going up to Prudential Center with pitchforks and torches and just basically saying, how could you sign both of those players to that amount of deal? Now you're sort of in a corner because, remember, Dawson Mercer, he was still on his entry-level contract. Luke Hughes and Simon Nemec, they're going to need new contracts sooner rather than later. It all would have put the Devils in a crunch when it comes to finance. That was a smart move. And if both of them were here, Devils wouldn't be able to get a goalie, just saying. All right, we're going to switch over to my personal opinions on Tom Fitzgerald momentarily. But before we continue, let me tell you about Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on Game Time app actually go down closer it gets to first pitch. Save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Get a great view of your seat in the app before you buy. And the lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in ticketing industry. That sounds very good to me. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Okay, I talked about some notable signings that Tom Fitzgerald has done during his tenure with the Devils as general manager. And a lot of people are saying, like, this was make or break for Tom Fitzgerald if he wanted to keep his job. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't understand the Tom Fitzgerald slander, quite honestly, because, yes, the Devils were in need of a better goalie, but here's the thing. The risk you run into if you would have traded for someone like Connor Hellebuyck was that he was due for a big contract. When Hellebuyck re-signed with the Winnipeg Jets, he signed an extension of 7 years and a contract worth of $59.5 million. That is a cap hit of $8.5 million. That would have put the Devils in a financial crunch. And here's the thing, similar to what Chico Resch has said on this show, just because you get a legitimate goaltender, it does not guarantee a thing. Because the Winnipeg Jets, they were bounced out in the first round in back-to-back seasons. It doesn't just take a goaltender to make you a legitimate team. It takes a collective team effort. Similar to what I've been saying on this show, it's not pick one or the other. And Vitek Vanecek, if we just go back in time during the summer, I get that he sort of fell off at around late January, February, and it seemed like he didn't really have that much positive momentum going his way into the playoffs. But the fact that he had 30-plus wins during that historic season and did something that hadn't been done since Martin Brodeur, I thought Tom Fitzgerald found a diamond in the rough. Hindsight is always 20/20, but I don't think that's a fireable offense. I think it's just like, okay, Vitek is still good. And Akira Schmid, he helped lead the Devils out of the first round against the Rangers. Maybe you run that tandem back and see what can happen. But I don't think it was just goaltending. It was just like the Devils dealt with a lot of injuries as well. Their blue line was very inexperienced because I like Nemitz and I like Hughes, but they need a lot more experience if they really want to be anchors on the Devils blue line for years to come. So I don't really understand the Tom Fitzgerald hate. And even then, the Devils weren't really a bad team. They just, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. They kind of just ran into the injury bug. And they were never out there on the rink consistently. And it showed in their record. Then they had not won no more than 3 games in a row. But they hadn't lost no more than 3 games in a row. So they never went on a lengthy losing streak. And that might surprise a lot of people. And they weren't mathematically eliminated from playoff contention until early April, when there was just a few weeks remaining in the season. And around that time, they also shut down Jack Hughes so that way he could get shoulder surgery. The thing about this Devils team is that they still have the capabilities, they have the assets, and I don't think 2022, 2023, I don't think that was a fluke. I think this team is capable of getting to the playoffs and maybe making a deep playoff push. They need to add more physicality. And I think Fitzgerald saw the issue, which was, okay, Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmid, they're not it. And trading for a goalie is really hard because goalies are in high demand. And sometimes the ball is in the opposing general manager's court because it's like, okay, we know you want a goalie, but what are you going to give us to get that said goalie? Which is why I think Jacob Markstrom was a smart move because it's just like, yes, he's in his mid-30s, but he still has a respectable track history. He led the league in shutouts. He's very durable, and he has respectable numbers. I don't think anyone could argue that. In fact, you can't. Numbers don't lie. So getting Jacob Markstrom, especially what you had to give up, I'd say that was a good move for Tom Fitzgerald. Once again, Linus Ullmark, you're going to have to sacrifice that 10th overall pick, and then after this year, he's an unrestricted free agent. UC Saros, same thing. And he's going to demand a decent amount of money. Ellis Merce-Lincoln's never really interested in him. John Gibson, that contract scares me. I think Tom Fitzgerald did the right thing, especially since he knows that he has to add a little bit more to the Devils' blue line, and you got to find a way to add more depth in terms of the bottom 6. The main question is, did Tom Fitzgerald redeem himself? I guess in the eyes of a lot of Devils discourse, he has because he saw the issues and he got right on it. He hired a good coach in Sheldon Keefe, and he got a good goalie in Jacob Markstrom, and I think a tandem of Markstrom and Allen, that's solid. Is it spectacular? We'll wait and see when the season kicks off. But in my eyes, I don't think Fitzgerald ever had to redeem himself. I think he did a pretty good job. And I think the only questionable thing that he has done was trading away Yegor Sharangovich for Tyler Toffoli. The thing is like, I knew that Yegor Sharangovich's days as a Devil were pretty much outnumbered because he wasn't going to get consistent playing time, especially with how stacked the top 6 was. But getting Tyler Toffoli added to the roster, Toffoli was great from a statistical standpoint, but other players suffered, like Timo Meier or Dawson Mercer, because their roles went down a little bit. And sometimes the Devils were forced to put Timo Meier on the third line. And if I had to take a hunch, I don't think he was too happy with that. So that's the thing. I think that's the only quote unquote blemish that Tom Fitzgerald did. And even then, when the Devils got Tyler Toffoli, people were ecstatic. I was ecstatic. I was like, the rich keep on getting richer. You add to the top six, and he's built a juggernaut on those top two lines. It would, but unfortunately, it looked better on paper than the product on the ice. In conclusion, I don't think Fitzgerald's job was ever on the line. I was never concerned about that. I just said if he just makes a few adjustments over the offseason, everything will be fine. But the big thing was he had to add a goalie because Kakinen and Allen weren't going to lead you that far. Solid, but they'll never be spectacular in my eyes. That tandem wouldn't work. But everything is subjective. Let me know what you thought. Did you think that Fitzgerald's job was on the line? And he was really smart, and the Devils still have the 10th overall pick. Keep in mind, they could still trade that away. We'll see what happens. All right, before I give my thoughts on the Stanley Cup Final, Game 6, let me tell you about Ultimate Hockey GM. Kind of ironic because I was talking about Tom Fitzgerald. Ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Do you think you could run the Devils better than general manager Tom Fitzgerald? Well, your dream could come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the seasons, and lead it to glory. Hire the right coaches and staff, trade players or draft picks, navigate through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As a Devils fan, you know there is no offseason. GMs are constantly making moves at every point of the year to improve their team's chances, and that's why I think you're going to love the game. Ultimate Hockey GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want, when you want. By the way, Locked On listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the game store, so make sure you check it out. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate Hockey GM, start your dynasty today. All right, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Game 6 being played at the Rogers Place as the Edmonton Oilers are looking to force it to a Game 7 back to Florida. How long is that drive? Is it like 2,000 plus miles, or how long is that in kilometers? Is that how they measure it in Canada? Anyway, long distance. I still think the Panthers are in the driver's seat, but Connor McDavid, he is amazing. Back-to-back 4-point performances. And I think it's getting to the point where even if the Oilers lose, you might have no choice but to reward the Conn Smythe Trophy to Connor McDavid, especially if he puts up another godlike performance. He's been incredible, and I'm running out of adjectives to describe it, and he's been carrying the team on his back. And I said in a prior episode, during this playoff run, he has surpassed Wayne Gretzky for most assists in a single playoff run. And I think he can also surpass Gretzky for most points in a single playoff run as well. Don't quote me on that. That's something I heard about. But I'm still going to lean towards the favor of the Panthers. And remember, I originally did say Panthers in 6, and I did backpedal a little bit because I thought it was heading toward the way of a sweep. But I do want to remind you this. The last time that a team blew a 3-0 lead, you would have to go back to 2014 when the LA Kings came back from a 3-0 deficit against the San Jose Sharks. And what happened? I think everyone on the Devils discourse can remember, because the Kings ended up hoisting the Stanley Cup. And who did they defeat in the Stanley Cup Final? It was the New York Rangers. I think that it's possible, especially going back to enemy territory if you're the Panthers in a hostile environment. And Sergei Bobrovsky, he has been brought back down to earth, and he has shown human-like weaknesses after basically single-handedly handcuffing the Oilers in Game 1. Hopefully, Bobrovsky doesn't repeat the same mistake that he made in last year's playoffs, especially against Vegas on the biggest stage, where just he ended up taking a few steps backwards at the wrong possible time. I have faith in Bobrovsky, but if the Oilers end up winning this game, if you're Paul Maurice, do you start Bobrovsky in Game 7? That's the main question. I will say this. The Panthers, they need to win 1 game. The Oilers, they need to win 2, but it's still very possible. The Oilers are creeping on in, and the Panthers might be in trouble. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Fingers crossed that the Panthers make my prediction come true.